story of the South goes back a long time to the founding of the first English colony in North America, Virginia, explored by Sir Walter Raleigh in the late 1500s and founded as a permanent colony in 1607. Virginia was much larger then than it is today. After the United States was formed, the entire states of West Virginia, Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, and portions of Ohio were all later created from the territory encompassed earlier by the colony of Virginia. The other major colony of the South was Carolina, officially established a little later in 1663. The northern part of this area, what is now North Carolina, was colonized in the 1650s and 1660s by settlers from Virginia. In 1669, a new town was founded in Carolina, which was to grow into the capital of the region, Charleston, or Charlestown, as the settlers then called it. In 1691, what would become North Carolina took steps to separate from South Carolina, and this process was finished in 1712. In 1732, a corporate charter for the province of Georgia was carved out of South Carolina by King George II. Georgia was intended, in part at least, to be a buffer between the English colonies and Florida, which was at that time settled and ruled by Spain, a competing colonial power with the British. The final southern colony, and one that was at least started out a little different than the rest, was Maryland. Founded in 1632 as a proprietary colony of Lord Baltimore, Maryland was intended as a safe haven for Catholics. Though from the very beginning Protestants were and remained the majority of Maryland, limited religious tolerance was practiced. In Britain at that time, as well as in Europe in general, the battle between Protestants and Catholics was heated. Despite its unique start, Maryland ended up developing a culture very similar to Virginia, and has historically been considered culturally and politically part of the South. This then was the territory of the early South: Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland. They were all English colonies, part of the British Empire, an empire which was late to the imperial game, but which would grow to challenge and ultimately even surpass the Spanish and Portuguese, which were at that time the major colonial superpowers of the world. Who were the people who settled the South? Before the British arrived, there were many native tribes up and down the eastern coast. They tended to be small nations, and their size had in many cases been greatly reduced by diseases they caught from early European explorers and traders in the region, especially the Spanish. As a result, in many areas, the colonists found the land largely open and available for settlement. In general, then, there was not a great deal of resistance to early European settlement of the southern colonies, though some resistance did appear later, especially from the Yamasee and later from the Cherokee, Creek, and other Indian nations. The colonists who did come were both men and women. This set the English colonists apart from the Portuguese and Spanish, who tended to intermarry with the native Indians as well as their African slaves in much of the New World. In 1619, 90 single women were sent to Virginia to promote the stability and growth of the colony. This was part of the general trend of both men and women European settlers coming to the English colonies. Most of the first settlers who came to the southern colonies were English, who especially dominated life along the coast, though Scots, Ulster Scots, Irish, Welsh, Germans, and small numbers of French, Dutch, Swedish, and Jews also helped people the area. In Carolina, a very large portion of the early English and Ulster Scots settlers were from Barbados, and they brought the values and culture of that wealthy British colony to the Charleston area in particular. West African slaves, the majority of them Bantu, and from the Congo-Angola region of Africa, were brought to the southern colonies. Their numbers were small initially, but grew as the economy changed and grew and focused on labor-intensive agriculture. In 1680, for example, blacks accounted for about 16% of the population of South Carolina, while by 1775, just a century later, they were about 60% of the population of the colony. Religiously, the South was made up of a Protestant majority, composed largely of Episcopalians, Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, and Lutherans, with small numbers of other religious sects. Roman Catholics, especially in Maryland, and a small number of Jews, especially in Charleston, also peopled the colonies. The colonists settled mostly along the coast, in Jamestown, Charleston, Savannah, and other towns. Outside of these small settlement communities, some carried on trade with the Indians. Deerskins were an early lucrative trade item. Naval stores were also an early economic product that much of the early economy was built upon. Cattle ranching also took off for a while. Indigo, tobacco, and rice would also become major crops for colonial Southerners before technological advances would later allow cotton to become king of the South's economy and shape the future of the South.